No one claps for the loser. That's the first truth I learned in high school theater. Right after realizing the spotlight doesn't just burn your skin, it scorches your pride. The second truth. If life hands you a role you didn't ask for, sometimes you find yourself staring into the eyes of someone else just as broken, just as misplaced, and realizing maybe the script isn't the worst thing in the world. When Mr. Daniels, our drama teacher, announced the spring play, I already knew what was coming. I wasn't the lead type. Not tall enough. Not smooth enough. Not charming enough. My name was always scribbled into the margins of the cast list next to side character or comic relief. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't just in the shadows, I was cast as the loser. Literally. The play was some gritty, modern retelling of an old Shakespeare tragedy. And my role? The kid everyone bullied. The punching bag. The guy who never wins. And standing across from me, holding the same flimsy script with shaky fingers, was the other loser. Ethan Hale. He wasn't supposed to be here. Ethan was the kind of boy whose quietness made teachers call on him just to make sure he still existed. Blonde hair always a little too neat. Eyes always cast down at his notebook like the world might swallow him if he looked up too long. He was the type you forgot until you didn't. Until he suddenly spoke and you realized his voice carried something fragile and sharp. Like glass. We were strangers in every way except one. Both of us had been assigned the roles nobody else wanted. Two losers. Side by side. Under the stage lights. Pretending to lose even more than we already did in real life. Guess we're in this together, he'd said, offering me a half smile. The kind that didn't quite make it past his lips. I wanted to laugh. Together. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. Still, as the days bled into nights of rehearsals, something happened. The stage that once felt like a punishment became a strange kind of sanctuary. In the silence between our lines. In the way Ethan's voice trembled when he spoke his part. In the way his eyes met mine like he was begging me not to look away, I felt the script shifting. Not the paper one. The other one. The script of my life. And it terrified me. Because the truth is, the world outside that theater didn't have room for boys like us to hold on to each other. Not in this town. Not in America, where football games filled the bleachers and boys like me and Ethan filled the background. Invisible until someone needed a target. But under those lights, Ethan wasn't invisible. Neither was I. And maybe, just maybe, losing together was the closest thing to winning we'd ever get. Rehearsals started rough. Mr. Daniels had this way of pushing you so far you either broke or discovered something about yourself you never wanted to know. He'd bark lines, demand more emotion, throw his arms around like some tortured artist in a Broadway fever dream. Everyone else laughed it off. But for me, every note felt like an attack. You're not convincing, he'd say, pointing at me. You're supposed to be crushed, humiliated. Where's the pain? It was ironic. Really. My whole life had been pain. You'd think I'd have it mastered by now. But every time I opened my mouth, the words felt heavy. Fake. Like I was wearing someone else's skin. Until Ethan. When Ethan spoke his lines, it wasn't theater. It was confession. His voice cracked. His eyes shimmered like he was holding back something real. Something too close to the surface. And suddenly, I wasn't acting anymore either. I wasn't pretending to be a loser. I was just me. Raw and exposed. Standing next to someone who understood without a single word. The other kids noticed. They whispered in the corners. Made jokes about how the loser duo was putting too much heart into the rehearsal. They called us dramatic, desperate, pathetic. But they didn't get it. They couldn't. Because when Ethan's hand brushed mine during a scene, just barely, Like an accident, me chest lit up with something I couldn't name. And when our characters fell to the ground in defeat, side by side, his shoulder pressed against mine. It didn't feel like losing. Felt like the first time I'd been seen. It wasn't all stage magic. Outside those walls, the world crept back in. One night after rehearsal, as we walked to the parking lot, some football players cut across the sidewalk, still in their sweaty practice gear. One of them, Mark Davis, all biceps and cruelty, smirked when he saw us. "Look at this," he said, blocking our path. "The theater rejects. Guess losers stick together." His friends laughed, that ugly kind of laughter that makes your skin crawl. Ethan shrank beside me, eyes glued to the pavement. Maybe they're practicing for their own little romance scene. Mark sneered. Two losers in love. The words stung more than I wanted them to. My fists clenched, every muscle in me screaming to fight back. But I knew how this story ended. You don't win against guys like Mark. You just survive. So I pushed past him, dragging Ethan with me. We didn't speak until we were in his beat-up car, the silence so thick it felt suffocating. Finally, Ethan whispered, "I hate them." His voice was sharp, trembling, like glass about to shatter. "I hate how they make me feel small." And before I could stop myself, I said, "You're not small." He turned to me then, really turned, and for the first time I saw the storm in his eyes. Not just fear, not just sadness, something bigger, something that scared me because it was the same thing I felt. That night, driving home, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about a play anymore. It was about us. And no script in the world could prepare me for what that meant. The night of the first full run-through, the theater was quiet, empty except for the echo of our voices. Ethan and I sat backstage, waiting for our cue. His hands trembled as he held his script, even though he already knew every line by heart. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, but his jaw was tight. I don't want to mess it up." "You won't." He looked at me, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between us. Promise, maybe, or a challenge. When we stepped onto the stage, the lights blinded us, hot and heavy. We spoke our lines, moved through the motions, but it wasn't until the final scene, the one where our characters lose everything, that it hit me. We fell to the ground, side by side, our scripts abandoned. Ethan's hand brushed mine, lingering this time, deliberate. His voice cracked on the last line, so raw it made my chest ache. And for a second, I forgot we were acting. For a second, felt real. When the scene ended, silence swallowed the theater. No applause, no laughter, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. We weren't losers. Not together. We were something else entirely. The silence of that empty theater stayed with me long after the lights dimmed. It clung to my skin on the drive home, curled itself into the corners of my bedroom, and refused to let me sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing Ethan's cracked voice repeating his final line over and over in my head. It wasn't just acting. I knew it. He knew it. The way his hand lingered against mine hadn't been written in the script. Neither had the way his eyes had glistened with something too raw, too vulnerable, to be rehearsed. And the worst part was how badly I wanted it to be real. The next day at school, the world had moved on like it always did. Hallways crowded with backpacks and gossip, lockers slamming, teachers yelling about tardiness. It was as if no one else had felt the earthquake that had shaken through me the night before. No one except Ethan. He caught my gaze across the cafeteria, his tray balanced nervously in his hands. For a second, I thought he might sit with me. But then Mark Davis and his crew swaggered past, throwing mocking glances in our direction. And Ethan veered off to an empty table by the windows. I hated myself for not calling him over, for not standing up in front of everyone and making some bold declaration. But I didn't. I just kept eating my fries like they tasted like anything other than ash. That night, rehearsal was tense. Mr. Daniels praised us for finally getting it. His voice thick with something that almost sounded like pride. That scene last night, he said, pointing between us. That's the kind of vulnerability I want. Hold on to it. I didn't look at Ethan. He didn't look at me. But the weight of unspoken words hung heavy in the air between us. It happened a week later. The cast was staying late for a Saturday rehearsal, running the play from start to finish. By the time we finished, it was nearly 9 o'clock, and the theater was empty except for the two of us. Ethan offered me a ride home. The night was cold, the kind that bit at your skin and made your breath visible. His car heater rattled weakly, barely keeping up. We drove in silence, the radio humming some old indie song I didn't recognize. At a stoplight, he finally spoke. Do you ever feel like you're always waiting for your real life to start? His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Like everything right now is just rehearsal. I stared at him, my chest aching. Yeah, all the time. The light turned green, but neither of us moved. Cars honked behind us, their headlights glaring. Still, he didn't press the gas. He just turned his head, meeting my eyes in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. And then, so softly I almost thought I imagined it, he whispered, I don't want to rehearse with you anymore. The words hit me like a punch. Before I could respond, he leaned across the console and kissed me. It wasn't perfect. His lips trembled. Mine froze at first, the angle awkward. But it was real. More real than anything that had ever happened on that stage. When we finally pulled back, the cars behind us were still honking, furious. Ethan laughed, breathless, and slammed his foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, and suddenly we were speeding down the dark road. Both of us laughing like idiots, like we'd just stolen something precious from the world. Maybe we had. But reality has a way of clawing back in. By Monday morning, the rumor mill had caught fire. I didn't know who saw us, maybe someone driving by that night. Maybe one of the cast had picked up on the tension, but whispers followed us down the hallways. Did you hear about Ethan and... They were in his car. Losers really do find each other. Mark Davis cornered me by the lockers, his smirk dripping with venom. So it's true, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Our little theater freaks are more than just acting out a tragedy. Laughter erupted around us. My fists clenched. My chest burned. But before I could speak, Ethan appeared. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed my wrist and pulled me out of the crowd, his hand firm and steady. We didn't stop running until we were outside, the winter air sharp in our lungs. They're not going to stop, he said, his voice shaking. I don't care. But the truth was, I did. I cared so much it made me sick. Because I knew what this town did to boys like us. I knew how quickly a rumor turned into a target. How fast a whisper turned into a shove against a locker or worse. Ethan looked at me then, his eyes fierce. So what? We let them win. We keep pretending. And there it was, the choice I'd been avoiding. Pretend. Or risk everything. I wanted to be brave. For him. For us. But bravery was a script I hadn't memorized yet. So instead, I said the only thing I could. No. We don't let them win. He nodded, like he believed me even if I didn't fully believe myself. The play's opening night was 3 weeks away. Every rehearsal after that became a battleground. Not just against forgotten lines or missed cues, but against the eyes on us, the whispers, the weight of everyone waiting for us to crumble. And yet, on stage, we were unstoppable. Every glance, every line, every brush of our handsit wasn't just acting anymore. It was survival. It was confession. It was love, hidden in plain sight. Mr. Daniels pulled us aside one evening, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "Whatever you two are channeling," he said, "don't lose it. The audience is going to feel it." If only he knew. The night before the show. Couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed at midnight, and it was a text from Ethan. "Can't sleep. Meet me." 15 minutes later, we were sitting on the stage, the empty theater around us like a cathedral. The only light came from the exit sign glowing red above the door. "This place feels different at night," he whispered. "Feels like it belongs to us," I said. He smiled. Faint but real. "You ever think maybe this is our real life? Not rehearsal. Not practice. Just this." I looked at him. Really looked at him, the way his hair fell into his eyes. The way his hands fidgeted when he was nervous. The way he carried 1,000 unspoken words in his silence. And I thought, maybe he was right. Maybe real life wasn't waiting out there somewhere. Maybe it was already here. On this stage. In this moment. With him. So I kissed him again. And this time, it wasn't trembling or awkward. It was sure. It was everything. We stayed there until the sun started to rise. 2 boys on a stage that had once cast us as losers. 2 boys rewriting the script. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was losing at all. Opening night arrived like a storm you'd seen building for weeks but still weren't ready for when it finally broke. The auditorium buzzed with chatter. The kind that crawled under your skin. Parents dressed in their best sat beside kids who only came because their friends forced them. The football players were there too, lounging in the back rows, smirking like they already knew how the night would end. Backstage, Ethan sat beside me, his hands trembling as he flipped through the script he didn't need anymore. He knew every line. So did I. But holding that script felt like holding a shield. "You okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave me a shaky smile. "No. But I will be." I wanted to reach for his hand. But I didn't. Not with the rest of the cast around us. Not when whispers had already spread like wildfire through the school. We had enough eyes on us without giving them proof. Still, when the curtain rose and the lights hit us, it felt like the world outside no longer existed. On stage, we weren't losers anymore. We were warriors, poets, broken boys fighting for dignity in a story that mirrored too closely the one we were living. Every word I spoke to Ethan carried more weight than any line I'd ever delivered. Every glance was loaded, every touch charged. And then came the final act. The scene where our characters lost everything our last moment together on stage. We fell, side by side, onto the wooden floorboards, scripts abandoned. Ethan's hand brushed mine. Deliberate, steady. His voice cracked on the last line. So real it tore through the air and silenced the crowd. The stage went black. For a long, unbearable moment, the silence stretched. Then, suddenly, applause thundered through the auditorium, crashing like a wave over us. People stood, clapping, shouting, cheering. But I didn't care about any of them. I only cared about the boy beside me, breathing hard, his eyes glistening with something fierce and proud. We had survived. Together. The cast celebrated backstage, hugging, laughing, high on adrenaline. Mr. Daniels gave his usual dramatic speech about the power of theater. But his eyes lingered on us, softer, almost knowing. Ethan and I slipped outside, the night air cool and sharp against our flushed skin. We sat on the curb, listening to the muffled sound of celebration behind the walls. They liked us, Ethan said, almost in disbelief. They loved us. I nudged his shoulder. Told you we weren't losers. He laughed, and the sound was so genuine, so unguarded. It made my chest ache. For a while, we just sat there in the quiet, letting the weight of the night settle around us. And then, without thinking, I reached over and laced my fingers with his. He froze, then squeezed back. No hesitation, no fear. And that small, simple act felt bigger than any standing ovation. Of course, the world didn't let us keep that peace for long. By Monday, photos from the play were everywhere. Someone had caught the moment our hands almost touched on stage, and the image spread across social media like wildfire. Looks real. One caption read, "Maybe it is." Another chimed in. The comments ranged from supportive to cruel. Some kids messaged me privately, telling me they admired us. Others weren't so kind. Mark Davis cornered me again at my locker, holding up his phone with the photo glowing on the screen. "So which one of you is the girl?" He sneered. Before I could react, Ethan stepped up beside me, his eyes blazing. "Neither," he snapped. "And at least we don't need to hide behind making fun of people to feel big." For a second, silence. Then laughter erupted, cruel and sharp. But something in Mark's eyes flickered like Ethan had landed a punch he didn't expect. We walked away together, my heart hammering. "Ethan," I whispered once we were out of earshot. "That was stupid." He gave a wry smile. "Brave," I said. "Really brave." His smile softened, and for once, I think he believed me. But bravery comes with a price. The bullying didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Snide remarks in the hallways, cruel notes shoved into lockers, even a slushie dumped over my head in the cafeteria. I could handle it. I'd been handling it my whole life. But Ethan carried it differently. He hid it, buried it, let it fester inside. I could see the weight pressing down on him, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his smile didn't reach his eyes anymore. One night after rehearsal, I found him sitting alone in the theater, staring at the empty stage. "They'll never stop," he said quietly, his voice flat. "Not here." I sat beside him. "So we make them irrelevant. We stop letting them write our story." He looked at me then, his eyes wet but defiant. "And write our own." "Exactly." The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken promises. And in that moment, I realized something. We weren't just fighting to survive anymore. We were fighting to live. To really live. The second performance was bigger than the first packed with parents, teachers, students, even strangers. And when the curtain fell, the applause was louder than ever. Afterward, a teacher I barely knew came up to me, her eyes shining. "What you boys did tonight," she said softly. "It mattered." It wasn't just a play anymore. It was a statement. And maybe that was enough to keep us going. But the truth was, outside that theater, the world still wasn't safe. One Friday night, walking home from Ethan's house, headlights flashed behind us. The car slowed. Voices jeered. Ugly words filled the air. We didn't see the bottle until it shattered near our feet. Glass sprang across the sidewalk. Ethan froze, his breath ragged. "Come on," I hissed, grabbing his arm. We ran until our lungs burned, until the car's laughter faded into the distance. When we finally stopped, Ethan leaned against me, shaking. "I can't do this forever." My chest ached. "You won't have to. I promise." But promises are easy. Keeping them, that's the hard part. The rest of the plays run blurred together. Each performance was another chance to prove we weren't what they said we were. Each night, the applause grew louder, the whispers sharper. And through it all, Ethan and I grew closer. Not just in stolen kisses in empty classrooms. Not just in whispered confessions under the bleachers. But in the quiet moments, the way he'd rest his head on my shoulder while we studied lines. The way I'd carry an extra hoodie for him when rehearsals ran late and the nights grew cold. We were building something. Something fragile. Yes, but real. And for the first time in my life, I started to believe that maybe destiny wasn't something you waited for. Maybe it was something you fought for. And we were ready to fight. Together. The final week of performances came faster than either of us expected. By then, the play wasn't just a school production. Anna Maria had turned into something bigger. Something people whispered about in town. Word spread beyond our high school. A local paper even ran a small piece. High school play surprises audience with raw emotion. They didn't name us directly, but anyone who had seen it knew the truth. Knew that what they had witnessed on stage wasn't just acting. It was us. Closing night. The energy backstage buzzed like electricity. Cast members snapped pictures. Hugged each other. Already nostalgic about something that wasn't even over yet. Mr. Daniels gave his usual pre-show speech about theater changing lives. But when his eyes found mine and Ethan's, there was something deeper there. Maybe he saw it. Maybe he always had. When the curtain rose, I felt strangely calm. The nerves that usually tangled in my stomach were gone, replaced with something steadier. Purpose. The play unfolded like muscle memory. Lines spoken, cues hit, movements sharp. But it was the final act, the one that mirrored our own story where everything shifted. We fell to the ground together. Beaten. Broken. Our characters defeated. Ethan's hand slid into mine. Not by accident. Not by hesitation. For a moment, under the blinding lights, we weren't characters at all. We were just two boys holding on to each other like the world couldn't tear us apart. When the lights cut to black, the applause roared like thunder. People stood, clapping, whistling, cheering. Should have felt like victory. But all I could feel was Ethan's hand in mine, warm and steady. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a loser. After the show, the cast spilled into the gym for the rap party. Music blared. Soda cans popped. Laughter echoed. Kids who had never spoken to me before clapped me on the back. Told me we killed it. That it was the best play the school had ever put on. But I barely heard them. My eyes kept finding Ethan. Across the room. Trapped in a circle of well-wishers. He smiled politely. But I knew him well enough to see the way his shoulders tensed. The way his eyes flicked toward the door. When I finally reached him, he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the whole night. "Want to get out of here?" I asked. His smile was small, tired, but real. More than anything. We slipped out quietly, unnoticed, the music fading behind us as we stepped into the crisp night air. The school parking lot was empty except for a few scattered cars. We sat on the hood of his beat-up sedan, looking up at the stars that barely managed to shine against the glow of streetlights. "It's over," Ethan said softly, almost like he didn't believe it. "The play." He nodded. "Feels weird. Like we've been living in someone else's story and now We just go back to normal. I thought about that. About the weeks we'd spent rehearsing. The nights we'd shared secrets in whispers. The way the stage had forced us to confront parts of ourselves we'd kept hidden. Maybe normal doesn't exist anymore, I said. Maybe this is our normal now. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for once there wasn't fear in his eyes. Just something steady, something hopeful. And then he leaned in and kissed me. Not hurried, not hidden, not trembling, just real. The kind of kiss you don't forget. But life has a way of reminding you that moments don't last forever. Monday morning hit hard. Without the shield of rehearsals, without the distraction of the play, the reality of our world crashed back in. Whispers in the hallways grew sharper. A slur scratched across Ethan's locker in red marker. A shove against my shoulder in the cafeteria that nearly sent my tray flying. Mark Davis was relentless. He'd found new fuel in the rumors, in the photos, in the whispers. And no matter how much I tried to shrug it off, every word, every laugh, every look cut deeper than I wanted to admit. One afternoon, as Ethan and I left school together, Mark and his friends trailed behind us, jeering. "Hey, Hale!" Mark shouted. "Which one of you gets the dress at prom?" His friends erupted in cruel laughter. I spun around, fury boiling over, but Ethan grabbed my arm before I could lunge. His voice was sharp, steady. "Don't. That's what they want." So I didn't. But the humiliation burned all the same. Later that night, Ethan texted me, "Sometimes I wish we could just disappear." I stared at the words for a long time, my chest tight. Finally, I replied, "Not disappear. Just go somewhere we can be ourselves." His answer came quickly. "Do you think that place exists?" I didn't know, but I wanted to believe it did. A week later, the answer came in the form of an acceptance letter. Ethan had applied to a summer program at a university 2 states away, creative writing. He hadn't told anyone, not even me. When he showed me the letter, his hands shook, his voice breaking. "I got in," he whispered. I didn't think I would, but I did. I stared at the paper, at the official seal, at the proof that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond these hallways. Beyond Mark. Beyond this town. "That's amazing," I said, and I meant it. But underneath the pride was something else. Fear. Because if Ethan left, what would that mean for us? The weeks that followed were a blur of finals, year-end assemblies, and long nights where Ethan and I stole what time we could. Lying on the hood of his car, sneaking into the empty theater, sitting in silence at the diner long after our food had gone cold. We didn't talk about the summer. Not directly. But the shadow of it hung over every kiss, every touch, every moment. One night, as we lay side by side in the grass outside town, Ethan finally spoke. "I don't want to leave you," he whispered. My throat tightened. "And I don't want you to stay just for me." He turned his head, his eyes glistening. "So what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. Not then. But I knew one thing for sure, whatever happened, whatever distance came between us, Ethan wasn't just another role in my story. He was the story. The last day of school arrived. Seniors threw papers in the air. Laughter filled the hallways. Lockers slammed for the final time. For us, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like standing on the edge of something we couldn't see yet. When the final bell rang, Ethan and I walked out together, the summer sun bright and merciless above us. "So this is it," he said quietly. "No," I corrected. "This is just the next act." He smiled then, the kind of smile that reached all the way to his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. That night, we returned to the empty theater one last time. The stage smelled faintly of dust and old paint, the curtains heavy and still. We stood in the center, where we had once been cast as losers, where we had once held hands in the dark. This place changed everything, Ethan said. No, I told him. You did. And then I kissed him, right there on the stage where the world had first seen us, no longer afraid of who might be watching. Because maybe we were still losers in everyone else's story. But in ours, we were destiny. Summer came heavy and bright, with air thick enough to make every step feel like a burden. The town seemed slower without school, without rehearsals, without the structure of the play that had given our lives rhythm. Ethan was leaving in less than 2 weeks. We didn't talk about it much. Not because we didn't care, but because caring too much made it hurt. Instead, we clung to small things, late-night drives with the windows down, sharing milkshakes at the diner, sitting in the grass behind the school where the football field lights still hummed even in the off-season. But silence only holds for so long. One night, parked by the river, Ethan finally said it out loud. I'm scared, he whispered, staring at the dark water. Of leaving. He nodded. Of leaving you. Of leaving this. What if distance changes us? I swallowed hard, my chest tight. It will, I admitted. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it'll change us into something stronger. His eyes found mine in the dark, searching for a promise I wasn't sure I could give. And if it doesn't, then I'll still be here when you come back, I said. Because you're not something I can lose, Ethan. Not really. He leaned into me then, his head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around him. We sat there in the quiet, both of us clinging to the moment like it was the last thread holding us together. The day he left, the sun was brutal, beating down on the cracked pavement of the bus station. His suitcase looked too small to carry all of him, and yet it seemed unbearably heavy in his hand. We stood there awkwardly, surrounded by strangers, neither of us knowing how to make goodbye sound anything less than final. I'll call you, he said. Every day. I answered. He gave me that crooked smile that always looked like it belonged to someone braver than he felt. Promise. Promise. The bus engine roared to life. He hugged me, tight, desperate, and for a second it felt like the whole world stopped. Then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd, the bus pulling away until it was just another shadow on the horizon. And I stood there, empty, holding the echo of his touch like it was all I had left. The weeks that followed were hard. The town felt smaller without him, the whispers sharper, the days longer. I kept waiting for a text, a call, something to make the distance feel less unbearable. And he did call. Every night. Sometimes his voice was bright, full of stories about the program, about new friends who loved writing as much as he did. Other times, it was quiet, heavy with homesickness and the weight of being away from everything familiar. But no matter what, he always ended with the same words. I miss you. And every time, I answered the same. I miss you more. By the end of the summer, when he finally came home, he was different. Not unrecognizable still Ethan. Still the boy who had stood beside me on stage and held my hand in the dark, but older somehow. Stronger. When I saw him step off that bus, his hair a little longer, his smile steadier, I realized something. Maybe distance hadn't broken us. Maybe it had made us more real. He dropped his suitcase and pulled me into his arms. Right there in front of everyone. No hesitation. No fear. And I held on, tighter than I ever had. Because I knew then what I hadn't been able to say before. He wasn't just my co-star, my secret, my almost. He was my future. Senior year began, and with it came a new script. One we weren't rehearsing but writing ourselves. We still had to face whispers, stares, the occasional cruelty of small-town minds. But something had shifted. Maybe it was us. Maybe it was the world. Slowly, grudgingly, learning to change. We joined the theater again. But this time, when Mr. Daniels handed out roles, he didn't call us losers. He just smiled, as if he knew what we had survived, what we had become. And maybe we weren't leads in everyone else's story, but in ours. We were everything. Years later, when I think back on that dusty high school stage, on the red curtains and the way the spotlight burned hotter than the sun, I don't remember the lines we spoke or the applause that followed. I remember the boy who stood beside me, script shaking in his hands, eyes wide with something fragile and brave. I remember the way his hand brushed mine, tentative at first, then steady. I remember the night he kissed me in the car, the world honking behind us, and how everything after that felt like we had stolen fire from the gods. We were cast as losers, written off before the story even began. But we rewrote the script. And in doing so, we found our destiny. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.